It was cold-hearted and it was cruel what you done to my daughter. You did not have to take my daughter's life.
I'm begging for forgiveness.
Then why flee and come back and move her and dump her in a field like she was a piece of trash?
A cold case has been cracked. Charlie Hall, 55, is under arrest, accused of killing 2 men more than 30 years ago. Detectives say he confessed to the crimes. Hall appeared before a judge, charged with 2 murders from 34 years ago. According to his arrest affidavit, when investigators showed up at his door, Hall admitted that in the 1980s, he would hear voices and use crack cocaine to drown them out. He claimed that while under the influence, he sometimes did very mean, violent things, and he now regrets his actions, expressing that he wouldn't be surprised if he had killed people. The Orlando Police Department cold case unit arrived at his home with a warrant to collect DNA. His wife, Shannon, is still in shock from the developments.
Were you home when police showed up?
Yeah, I was right here.
Investigators say Hall terrorized the streets of the west side of downtown Orlando for nearly 2 months, from August 20th to October 11th, 1987. According to Orlando police, Hall used a metal rebar pipe to beat men over the head 16 times, knocking them out before robbing them of their wallets. 2 of those men died from their injuries. Shannon, Hall's wife of 12 years, is in shock as her husband is now accused of murder.
18 years old and now he's 56. I mean, it changed his life. He did 21 years.
According to his arrest warrant, Hall was convicted of 2 of the brutal beatings and served more than 2 decades in prison. Some of his victims were homeless and attacked while they were sleeping or walking alone in downtown Orlando. Of those attacked, 2 died. On August 24th, 1987, Lawrence Stewart was found lying on his back, unresponsive, along West Robinson Street, with blunt force trauma to his head. He died a month later. On September 4th, 1987, Louis Holloway was found beaten and unresponsive in a parking lot on Livingston Street while walking to work. He died 2 days later. In 2022, investigators used new technology to test old DNA collected at the crime scenes and compared it to Hall's DNA, solving the 2 murders 3 decades later. Hall is currently being held at the Orange County Jail without bond. A young mother, Amelia Jackson, was sentenced to 24 years in prison for shooting and killing another mother. The courtroom was filled with tears as the victim's family expressed their deep disgust and heartbreak.
It was cold-hearted and it was cruel what you done to my daughter. You did not have to take my daughter's life. Never get to see her again.
An argument erupted between Amelia Jackson and Azuri in a car. When the driver pulled into an apartment parking lot on Taylor Road in East Cleveland, they exited the vehicle and began fighting. As another person tried to intervene, Jackson chased Azuri and shot her in the parking lot. Azuri's final words were desperate pleas for her life.
Ms. Uzuri did beg and say, please don't, I have kids. The witnesses saw her, this woman right here with a gun pointed at Ms. Uzuri.
With tears in her eyes, Jackson struggled to make eye contact with Azuri's family as she offered a heartfelt apology.
I am sorry.
The tragedy is compounded by the fact that both Jackson and Azuri were mothers of young children.
Great grandbabies, missing their mom, crying for her. At night, they can't sleep.
Some family members have found it in their hearts to forgive Jackson, while others remain deeply unforgiving.
I try. I can't forgive her right now.
The courtroom was filled with friends and family of Jaden Rentas, who was tragically killed by her boyfriend, Stephen Fisher. Fisher, who claimed the shooting was accidental, is now facing up to 10 years in prison. The judge described the case as one of the worst instances of reckless homicide she has encountered.
She will never get married. She will never have children. She never got a chance at life.
Jaden's mother, Jasmine Torres, shared her profound grief and the impact the murder has had on her life and family. She described the immense pain of losing her daughter and how it has affected their daily lives and emotional well-being.
You stole the most beautiful soul from this earth, and no earthly justice will ever amend that.
Stephen Fisher has been sentenced to 10 years in prison for the murder of his girlfriend, Jaden Rentas. Fisher, who had been hiding Jaden from her family for 10 days, shot and killed her inside a stolen car.
Stephen did tell the police that he had dropped the magazine from the firearm and racked the slide before he put it to Jaden's head and pulled the trigger. However, when the homicide detectives were taken to the cemetery and shown where Stephen had hid the weapon, They found that it had the magazine in the butt of the weapon and a live round still in the chamber.
After killing Jaden Rentis, Stephen Fisher abandoned her body in the stolen car. His lawyer argued that the shooting was accidental, but the judge's decision reflected the severity of Fisher's actions, resulting in a 10-year prison sentence for the boy.
He loved her. He had no motive or interest in ever hurting that girl.
We believe Stephen Fisher's conduct is the most serious type of the offense of reckless homicide.
If it was an accident, as he said, then why flee and come back and move her and dump her in a field like she was a piece of trash instead of calling 911?
Stephen Fisher faced multiple charges, including reckless homicide, grand theft, tampering with a corpse, and possession of a firearm. Once one of the most feared figures in hip-hop, Suge Knight, who built an empire with death row records, now finds himself facing a murder charge and a potential life sentence. The former rap mogul collapsed in a Los Angeles courtroom, falling headfirst onto a chair right after his bail was set at $25 million.
They lock him up in jail in solitary confinement. They can't get his diabetes medicine. He was dripping sweat like someone threw a bucket of water on him.
This marks the fourth time Suge Knight has been taken from court by ambulance since his arrest for the hit-and-run death of Terry Carter. Knight's attorneys argue that surveillance footage shows he acted in self-defense. The video reportedly shows Knight, in his red truck, being approached by a group of men and allegedly attacked. Knight then reverses the truck, speeding off and first injuring one man before running down Carter. Prosecutors requested that Knight's bail be set at $25 million.
To be honest, I don't think any bail is enough for him.
It's like she watches Empire and comes in and says he's an unrepentant and shameless criminal.
Suge Knight, who co-founded Death Row Records in the 90s, has a history of convictions for assault with a gun and armed robbery, and has served time in prison. He is currently facing 4 criminal charges, including murder, and has pleaded not guilty. A drunk driver lost control of his car and crashed into a group of homeless campers, killing 4 of them. Earlier this year, the driver pleaded guilty to several charges and was sentenced to nearly 26 years in prison. In the aftermath of the crash, friends of the victims gathered in a small triangle of grass just off a busy street in Salem. They built a memorial to remember those who died: Joanne Beck, Luke Keggy, Rochelle Zamacona, and Joe Posada III.
He just smiled and he laughed. He was
25-year-old Enrique Rodriguez had a blood alcohol level nearly 3 times the legal limit when he lost control of his car and crashed into a group of homeless campers, killing 4. Rodriguez had agreed to plead guilty to multiple charges, including manslaughter, assault, and driving under the influence. At his sentencing, the district attorney highlighted that Rodriguez's driver's license was suspended at the time of the crash due to what she described as an atrocious driving record. She detailed how Rodriguez had been partying at a friend's house, then drove to a Salem bar, got into an argument with an ex-girlfriend, drove away, nearly hit a friend on the curb, and then, while driving west on Front Street, turned north, left the roadway, and crashed into the homeless encampment. Rodriguez had no prior criminal record before this incident. The judge sentenced him to nearly 26 years in prison.
Well, if he was intoxicated, he deserves it. He was, yeah.
A homeless support center, Aaron Bennett, was camping in a park when the crash occurred. Although he did not know the victims personally, he was well aware of their deaths. Bennett believes that nearly 26 years is an appropriate sentence for Rodriguez.
I think definitely when you choose to drink alcohol and get behind the wheel, because was there 4 of them? Yeah, I still see time to time paintings on the bridge for those family members.
Rodriguez was already in jail when he was sentenced. He has been transferred to the State Department of Prisons, where he will remain until he is 50 years old. There's an appeal planned for Rohel Aguilera Medeiros, the truck driver sentenced to 110 years in prison for a fiery crash that killed 4 people. A jury found Aguilera Medeiros guilty and sentenced in Jefferson County District Court. The length of the sentence has sparked significant controversy. Kames Kogan, the truck driver's attorney, says the appeal will not challenge the 110-year sentence, but will focus on potential errors during the trial. Nonetheless, the sentence has alarmed many in the trucking industry, given the severity of the punishment for the 2019 crash that resulted from brake failure.
It's unbelievable, honestly, because it could happen anytime, anywhere. And if the brakes fail, the brakes fail. It's a malfunction.
4 people were killed when the truck driver, Rogel Aguilera Medeiros, was convicted of vehicular homicide, assault, and recklessness. He bypassed a runaway truck ramp and swerved in to stop traffic.
I'm begging for forgiveness.
His attorney has announced plans to appeal the conviction. Additionally, an online petition, which has garnered around 2 million signatures, calls for mercy of the sentence.
Review all clemency applications. We've yet to receive one from the individual.
Some, but not all, of the crash victims settled lawsuits against the trucking company involved, which has since gone out of business. As a result, the truck driver is now left to bear full responsibility for the incident.
Loss of life is sad regardless, but 110 years, that seems a bit much.
The truck driver's attorney argues that the law does not distinguish between negligent acts, like those in this case, and deliberate crimes, such as a mass shooting. Jessica House was sentenced to 6 months in jail for attacking Hamilton Elementary's principal and assistant principal with pepper spray. She admitted to the assault, claiming it stemmed from frustration over her autistic son's treatment at the school. Both victims described their fear and ongoing anxiety during the courtroom proceedings. The judge emphasized that, despite her concerns, her actions were unacceptable and must be addressed.
Obviously, a parent, I can understand a parent protecting his or her child, of course. But if you think about the irony of what happened, you essentially assaulted and bullied 2 people in response to your son being mistreated. I mean, how is that the way to advocate and protect your son and go to bat for him? By doing essentially the thing he was being subjected to other people.
Jessica House has to report to jail, giving her time to make arrangements for her young children. Lazarian Gaillard, 20, became notorious across Milwaukee County for his criminal activities, which were frequently captured on camera. His crimes included stealing luxury cars from driveways, breaking into homes, and evading police in high-speed chases. One particularly troubling incident involved him stealing a car with a child inside and later abandoning the child in a yard. This behavior led Milwaukee police to label him as their most wanted car thief.
This man treats victimizing other people like a job. This defendant is basically a one-man crime spree.
Following a plea deal, Lazarian Gaillard apologized for his actions during his sentencing for 17 felonies.
I'd like to say that I apologize for everything that I did and I take full responsibility.
The judge was not convinced by Gaillard's apology.
Nobody goes into another person's home.
The judge came down hard on the 20-year-old Lazarian Gaillard, who has been linked to stealing dozens of cars since 2019.
Mr. Gaillard, you have engaged in a crime spree that I am astonished by.
The judge highlighted Milwaukee's stolen car epidemic during the sentencing.
I guess what I'm saying to you is you are part of the problem in our community. You are representative of many young men who choose to engage in this sort of criminality. But you've been caught now, so you are here.
Gaillard was sentenced to 15 years in prison, exceeding the sentence recommended by prosecutors. A Milwaukee homicide suspect, who was arrested 3 times by U.S. Marshals, managed to post over $100,000 in cash bail. However, a Waukesha judge hasn't let him go yet. Kenneth Wyman, one of Wisconsin's most wanted fugitives, was recently released from the Milwaukee County Jail after someone paid a 6-figure amount for his bail. He had been in jail when U.S. Marshals picked him up for the 3rd time in 4 years. Despite the hefty bail, he can't go far until he takes care of some outstanding warrants in Waukesha.
Where is all this money coming from?
If you believe that high cash bail is meant to protect the public from dangerous criminals, it hasn't been very effective in Kenneth Wyman's case.
I have somebody who qualifies for public defender representation, but is literally sitting on $125,000 worth of cash.
U.S. Marshals have arrested him 3 times, with the latest being for a homicide warrant.
We were hoping that he would stay in there until his trial date.
Each time judges set a higher cash bail, he posts it and disappears.
He doesn't just flee and not come back to court.
he flees the jurisdiction, he flees the state of Wisconsin.
Family members of the man, Kenneth Wyman, are accused of killing. They were outraged when they learned late last week that someone posted over $100,000 in cash for Wyman's bail, leading to his release from Milwaukee County Jail once again.
$100,000 to drug dealers is no money. They have that stashed away in the refrigerator in a rubber band.
Before Wyman could be released, deputies moved him to Waukesha County Jail to address a couple of warrants. Prosecutors revealed that phone calls from the jail alerted them to Wyman's plans to head to California or Las Vegas,
Planning to flee the state the second he gets out.
As a result, Waukesha County Court Commissioner David Herring raised the bail to $200,000 in cash, keeping one of Wisconsin's most wanted in jail for the time being.
He gets out, gets this $200,000. Do you think there's any chance he's going to show up for his trial?
No, he will never. He will never.
DeAndre Darrell Kraft, 26, was sentenced after hearing emotional statements from the daughters of one of the men he killed.
And Mr. Lockman, did you have any additional statement on behalf of the people?
I do not, Your Honor.
Right, and Mr. Cordes' statement?
Just to reiterate what was in the pre-sentence report, I've always found Mr. Kraft to be pleasant, positive, and polite in all of our dealings, and I know he is going to file an appeal in this matter, so with that, we'd ask the court go ahead with sentencing.
All right, and Mr. Kraft, did you have anything that you would like to say before I sentence you?
No, ma'am.
Okay, well, Mr. Kraft, at this point you are 26 years old and you have 5 prior felonies and 8 prior misdemeanors, and we're here for you to be sentenced regarding this incident that occurred back in June of 2022, June 23rd to be exact, where you, along with at least one other person, apparently made the decision to end the lives of Mr. Lusk and Mr. Vaughn. You were found guilty after evidence was presented to a jury. You had a jury trial. There was a lot of evidence presented, including some Ring camera footage. There was some video from a store from across the street. That, along with all of the other evidence presented, led to you being convicted of this double homicide, as well as being a felon in possession of a firearm which you were ineligible to possess, carrying a concealed weapon, and then 3 counts of felony firearm. I want to say to the family members that spoke and those who didn't, that I am sorry for your loss. Better yet, I am sorry that the lives of these men were stolen from you, that your father was stolen from you, that your uncle was stolen from you. You are definitely understandably angry in this moment. I was glad to hear Ms. Crump state that she does not have hatred towards this defendant, because that hatred would only serve to continue to victimize you for years to come, as opposed to having you focused on continuing to represent your father's legacy, which is obviously more important. And Mr. Kraft, I don't know, obviously your actions had a ripple effect. I don't know if you didn't think of the ripple effect or simply didn't care. Your actions in this case are simply inexplicable, and this is just a needless tragedy. I'm not sure what more I can say with respect to that, and there are mandatory sentences in this case, so what I'm going to do is sentence you in accordance with those mandatory sentences, which means that for counts 4, 5, 6, and 7, which are this carrying a concealed weapon and the 3 felony firearm charges, you're going to receive 716 days credit for all of those. For the felony firearms, I'm sentencing you to the 2-year mandatory sentence. For the carrying a concealed weapon, I am sentencing you to 4 to 5 years in the Michigan Department of Corrections, which will be served consecutively to the felony firearm charges. I'm sorry, the CCW will not be consecutive. it will be running concurrently. In addition to that, for counts 1 and 2, which are the homicides of Mr. Lusk and Mr. Vaughn, I'm sentencing you to the mandatory sentence of life in prison without parole. And this, you'll receive credit for 0 days. This sentence will have to run consecutively to the felony firearm charges. And I'm also sentencing you to, for the counts 3 and 4, which are the felon in possession and the carrying concealed weapon, I'm sentencing you to 4 to 5 years in the Michigan Department of Corrections. That's in accordance and within the guidelines scored for those particular counts. In addition to that, Mr. Kraft, you will be responsible for $476 state minimum cost, $130 crime victim rights assessment, and $1,000 in court costs. You do have 42 days to appeal this sentence, Mr. Kraft, and if you'd like a court-appointed attorney to represent you in an appeal, you have 42 days to make that request. And that's what the purple sheet is for, that the deputy will give you. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Joshua Ade was the mastermind behind this incident. On August 4th, 2020, on Minnesota Street, Rebecca Borowski, John Miller, and James Grittner were shot. While Rebecca and John survived, James Grittner lost his life. After an investigation, the police arrested Joshua Ade for the crime. When someone commits a crime, they might not fully realize the impact of their actions, but when the details are presented in court, they may begin to understand the severity of what they've done.
On Tuesday, August 4th, 2020, officers of the Oshkosh Police Department responded to a shooting at Minnesota Street in the city of Oshkosh. Upon their arrival, officers encountered a man waving them down in the street near 1715. That man had a gun wound through his face. As officers walked up the driveway at 1715, they encountered a man lying deceased in the driveway. That man had a wound to the side of his head. Just inside the garage at 1715 Minnesota Street was a woman bleeding from her ear. That woman also had a wound to the head. Earlier that evening, Rebecca Borkowski, her father James Grittner, and family friend John Miller were at Rebecca's home in Oshkosh repairing a Chevy Tahoe that was parked in Rebecca's garage. Rebecca co-owned the Tahoe with her ex-boyfriend, Joshua Ade, the defendant. Rebecca had recently ended her 5-year relationship with the defendant. She intended to finalize the breakup by returning all of the defendant's property to his home, including that Chevy Tahoe. The defendant's home is in Monticello, Wisconsin, which is over 2 hours' drive from Oshkosh. Rebecca was concerned about driving the Tahoe that distance due to a mechanical issue. On Tuesday, August 4th, 2020, Rebecca made arrangements for her father, James Grittner, and family friend John Miller to help her fix the Tahoe so that she could return it the following weekend, finalizing her breakup with the defendant. The three met at Rebecca's house earlier in the evening and began that repair. Shortly before 8:30 p.m., as they were finishing up putting away their tools, the defendant arrived at Rebecca's home uninvited. Rebecca will testify that she saw the defendant walking toward her. He said to her, "Hey boo, what you doing?" And he pointed a pistol with a red laser at her. She turned and was shot in the side of the head. The bullet entered through her right ear and traveled to the back of her skull where it remained lodged. In spite of that injury, Rebecca survived. Rebecca will testify that she has no information about what happened to either John Miller or her father, James. Rebecca will testify that when she was shot, she collapsed in the garage where she remained until officers found her. You'll see her pooled blood in the garage. You'll observe her condition when officers came upon her. John Miller will testify that as he was finishing up the repair to the Tahoe, he heard the defendant say to Rebecca, "Hey babe." As the defendant walked toward Rebecca, John turned away. He heard a pop-pop noise and looked back. When he looked back, he saw the defendant pointing at him. John turned to run and was shot in the right side of his face as he ran away. The bullet entered the right side of John's face, traveled through his mouth, and out the left side of his face. John also survived. John Miller will testify that after he was shot, he continued running until he arrived at Rebecca's neighbor's house, 2 doors to the south. That neighbor was Dan Schrader. You'll hear from Dan today. John entered Dan's home and Dan called the police. That call came into dispatch at 8:27 p.m. Rebecca's father, James Grutner, was also shot in the head. You'll hear testimony from the medical examiner that the bullet entered the left side of his head, just above his ear, traveled downward through his brain, and remained lodged in his skull. James Grutner did not survive. He was pronounced deceased at the scene.
It's hard to imagine the pain a girl feels after losing her father. This pain becomes even more intense when she has to face the person responsible, especially if that person is her boyfriend. Describing her emotional state in this situation is incredibly challenging.
Now, can you see in that picture what you were referencing before?
Yes.
And what can you tell from that picture there?
Loaded with bullets.
Okay, and again, it's visible to the naked eye whether or not it's loaded.
Correct. You can see it from the rear of the gun. You don't have to point the barrel at yourself.
Okay, and you're certain that when you cocked it back, it was not loaded in the 2018 incident?
100% confident it was not loaded.
And you're certain that when he cocked it back, it was loaded?
Yes.
Okay. And again, we went through those 2018 texts back and forth, and you had referenced in those texts, you'll never forget the sound of that gun being cocked back?
Correct.
And you were referring to Joshua Aid pointing that loaded gun during an argument?
Yes.
Now, Attorney Seaman asked you several questions related to an insurance policy. Now, you attempted to break up with the defendant back in March, right?
Yes.
And we saw the exchanges where numerous times you are telling him the relationship is done.
Correct.
Did you have any reason to believe that he still had that policy in place on August 4th, 2020?
When a man who has narrowly escaped death faces his attacker in court, he must feel a heavy weight on his chest. Yet, to seek justice, one must stand up and speak the truth, as the court relies solely on evidence.
Way over here. Yeah, so they're dealing with that over there?
I'm not worried about that.
Okay, which hospital is it?
I don't even know where I'm at. I just came to work in a vehicle.
Okay, you're in Oshkosh right now. We're gonna...
And 11:30 to 13:20.
Here's his license, you guys know that.
Appreciate it. Yeah. Thanks, sir. Thanks for the second.
I wanna go. Are you guys okay if I talk to him quick? No, I gotta just... John, who was the person that came and did this?
All I know is his name is Josh.
Josh? That's all you know?
Yeah, it was that lady. It was her ex-boyfriend I got.
Lady's ex-boyfriend.
Yeah, I didn't know her or him. I was just asking.
Who's the lady? What's her name?
All I know her name is Becky.
Becky.
Yeah, I never.
Is she the one that head injury? Was there two females? Or was it a female and male?
I'm a female. Me, a male, and another female.
So the female, okay, who's the other male?
Jim.
Jim what?
I don't know his last name.
You don't know his last name? Okay. What were you over there doing?
Working, changing a radiator.
So you were changing a radiator. So you were working on whose car? Hers. So you were working on Becky's car. Were you under the car, in the car?
I just got done and I turned around I looked at him, and he went for her, and he pulled up and shot her. And then turned around and shot me.
Okay, so you get finished changing the radiator, you turn around, and what do you hear, see?
I turned around, and the guy, he was staring there, and he looked at her and went towards her, and I was doing something, and then next thing I know, her pop, and then he turned around and shot me.
Okay.
And hang on, later, he hit the ground.
I'm gonna go get my phone to snap some pictures quick, okay?
And then I'd like to play a portion of another body cam. This will be 7F to 43, 1248 to 1427.
From the front of it? No, when he first gets there, I'm right at the front of the vehicle. My back is to him. Okay. But I see Becky look up, and then I just turned and looked. And I said, "Oh, you died?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, the vehicle's done, sir." And he walked to Becky and said, "Hey, babe," and that's what I heard about.
Do you know of any problems between those two, or Jim ever told you, or?
All I know is they work together.
Okay. Who told you that?
The parents, the mom, and the dad.
Okay. Trying to think if there's anything else. Was there ever a mention that, like, he was gonna come and hurt somebody today? Did he threaten anybody specifically, say, I was coming or I'm gonna hurt somebody, or?
No, nobody would have went. If anybody thought anything like that, nobody would have went.
Okay, so he told you on the phone that you probably shouldn't go there, right?
Yeah.
Okay. But that's all he said?
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's just, I understand
that.
The lady needed a truck fix.
Yep, you were just trying to help somebody else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I wasn't doing it to make any money or nothing. I was just doing it for free.
Right.
And then trying to help somebody out. You know, I just met them. They were nice people. They had me over to their house. We were going to be staying there for a week. I mean, they were feeding us.
At Jim's house, or?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
So that was all video from what you reported immediately after the incident, both on the scene, in the ambulance, and at the hospital that night?
Yes, ma'am.
And that's consistent with what you're testifying to today?
Yes. To Winnie Lake, Wisconsin.
And where is that in the state of Wisconsin?
It'd be Racine County, I believe.
Okay, so southern Wisconsin?
Yes.
Okay. And what date, if you recall, did you go to Winnie Lake to meet James and Julie?
What?
What day or what date?
Oh, August. It would have been the morning of August 4th.
Okay. So August 4th, 2020 was the first date you had met James and Julie Grutner?
Yes.
And if you wouldn't mind just speaking into the microphone a little bit more, just to make sure the jury can all hear you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Turn up the mic so that may help.
Thank you. When you met James and Julie that day, did they ask you for assistance in repairing a vehicle?
They said their daughter's vehicle needed to be fixed, and they didn't ask me for help at all. I volunteered to do it.
And you had just met them that day. Had you ever met their daughter that day?
No.
Or that morning, I should say?
No, not at all. I mean, I knew they had four kids, I believe.
Okay. And you agreed to do that just as a favor?
Yeah.
What did you know about where James and Julie's daughter lived?
I didn't know where they lived at the time. I didn't even know what city I was in when it all happened and everything happened. I had no clue.
Sure.
Then I discovered it was Oshkosh. I mean, I help people, that's what I do.
How did you end up getting from Wind Lake in southern Wisconsin to James's daughter's house?
Gym girls.
And do you know about how long that took to get there?
About an hour and a half, 2 hours.
Now, at some point on the afternoon of August 4th, 2020, did you receive a call from a man you didn't know?
Yes, I did.
And what was the nature of that call?
He wanted to know my certification on call, on working on vehicles, and my certification number, and all the, stuff like that.
And did he say who he was?
He said his name was Josh, yes.
Did you have any idea who he was in relation to the auto repair that you were going to do?
Yes, I did.
And who did you understand him to be?
Rebecca's ex-boyfriend.
As part of this case, did you provide your cell phone to officers of the Oshkosh Police Department so that they could download its contents?
Yes, I did.
And did you do that voluntarily?
Yes.
I've handed you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 37. Does that appear to be a call log from your cell phone?
Yes.
Now, Your Honor, I would ask to move, I would move to admit the State's Exhibit 37 into evidence.
Any objection?
No, sir.
After receiving Exhibit 37.
If you could just turn to the second page, and I'm going to direct you to the call labeled number 4, calling from a number ending in 6331. Does that appear to be the call you received from an individual identifying themselves as Josh?
Yes, it does.
And does that call indicate, or does that log indicate the time the call came in?
Yes, it does.
And what time is that?
2:26.
Joshua Ade was sentenced to life in prison without parole, plus an additional 80 years for shooting his ex-girlfriend, fatally shooting her father, and shooting another man last year. The incident centers on William Knight. In March 2017, in Summit County, William Knight took the life of 24-year-old Keith Johnson. The police quickly connected William to the crime after discovering the body and filing charges against him. While presenting the case, the prosecutor disclosed all information about both the victim and the suspect. In this case, the prosecution followed the same thorough approach.
May it please the court, Mr. O'Brien, Mr. Colombo, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. Judge Tony, this is opening statement. In most cases, evidence is presented in bits and pieces and not always in perfect chronological order. The opening statement is my opportunity to give you an overall picture. A roadmap, if you will, of what this case is about so that you will understand the importance of each and every piece of evidence at the time that piece of evidence is presented. And in this case, ladies and gentlemen, the evidence is going to show that back on the evening of March 20th, 2017, a little over a year ago, the defendant, William Knight, his daughter, and his son-in-law went on a repo mission to recover a stolen dirt bike. And when, as things would go, as expected, there was a disagreement over that bike. The defendant was armed, he was ready, and he subsequently took out a .357 revolver, pointed it, pulled the trigger, into the head of Keith Johnson, causing his death. A dirt bike. A Yamaha YZ80 dirt bike. It was a dirt bike that was owned by Curtis Gill. Curtis Gill was the son-in-law of the defendant. And actually the dirt bike belonged to Curtis's son. And back in 2016, around February of 2016, before this incident occurred, the bike got stolen. And they made a report to the Akron Police Department about the bike. There was no word and nothing was heard about the bike for about 13 months. So we fast forward again to March of 2017. And Curtis Gill became aware that that dirt bike, his son's dirt bike, had been put up for sale. And it was put up for sale on an internet website associated with Facebook. And so Curtis Gill decided to go about the process of trying to retrieve the bike, contacting the seller, trying to arrange a meeting, and ultimately hoping to retain that bike. Now, the person who had put that bike on sale was a young man by the name of Justin Badgett. Justin did not own the bike. He had agreed to try to sell it for a friend for an acquaintance of his, Keith Johnson. And the agreement was that Justin, if he was able to procure a buyer and have a successful sale, that he would get some money in return, about $100, like a commission for setting up the sale. Keith Johnson. As you've heard, Keith Johnson was a 24-year-old young man. He's a father, a son, a grandson. And he had a passion for things like dirt bikes and four-wheelers and things of that nature. And about 3 months prior to his, he purchased that bike. Keith Johnson did not steal that dirt bike. He purchased that dirt bike about 3 months prior from his mother's neighbor's son. But he did know that it was a stolen dirt bike when he purchased it. And that was wrong. That was a mistake. But it was not a mistake that was worthy of him losing his life that day. And so when we talk about March 20th and the discussions that are going on, Justin telling Keith that he has a potential buyer, the hope was to go to 797 Danby to make a sale. 797 Danby being the residence that you just saw in the area you just saw. And that's not where Keith lived. Keith lived in an apartment. And so he kept the bike at his uncle's house, an individual by the name of Isaac Sprague. And that was at 797 Danby. They had no idea that the person who was expressing interest in selling and buying that bike was the true owner, the actual owner, Curtis Gill. Curtis Gill had seen pictures of that dirt bike online. He was convinced that it was his son's dirt bike, and he was correct. And so he went about doing whatever it would take to set up this meeting, using a false name, trying to do research about who was selling him the bike. And he also did the right thing. He contacted the Akron Police Department. And he told the Akron Police Department, hey, that dirt bike that I reported stolen about 13 months prior, I think I've located it now, and I want some help by the police. Night of March 20th, the police had a lot of calls. And they prioritized the calls as far as which ones they address first, which ones they go out to. And based upon the nature of this call, it was not a high priority. They were not able to immediately go out and meet with Curtis Gill. Curtis Gill was eager and anxious to get that bike. And although he hoped that the police were going to show up, he was willing to go forward for this meeting and not necessarily have the police present for everything that was going to go down, or have the police themselves take care of this, in which maybe there would never have been a meeting between Curtis Gill and Keith Johnson that night. Now, while Curtis was willing to go forward without the police being there, hoping they would be, he was not willing to go alone. He solicited the help of his wife, Michelle, and the defendant, William Knight. And they went over to that Danmead address in two different vehicles. Curtis Gill drove his black Ford truck. He went by himself, and he was in contact by telephone, with text and telephone, with his wife and the defendant, and they were in the defendant's red Chevy truck as they went over to Danmead Avenue. The defendant also had on his person concealed a loaded .357 revolver, loaded with 5 rounds. And this was not illegal, for the defendant had just recently obtained his CCW permit, his permit which allowed him to carry a concealed weapon. In fact, he specifically got that permit in January of 2017, about 2 months prior. And so unlike your average citizen, he had the right and the privilege to go through everyday life with a loaded gun concealed on his person. Now, having a CCW permit can give you a sense of empowerment. Having a loaded gun, life and death, right there with you at all times. But with it also goes a huge responsibility not to abuse that power. And in addition to that loaded .357, he had additional ammunition. He had what's known as speed loaders, 2 of those speed loaders. And a speed loader for this type of revolver contains 5 bullets each. And the idea is that if you shoot every bullet in that revolver, you can put all 5 bullets immediately into that revolver. You don't have to waste time putting in one at a time. Speed loader, you put it all in one revolver and you're ready to go. And he had 2 of those. And those were also on his person and in the car as he headed to Danby Avenue. So that kind of sets the stage for you. Party's heading to Danby Avenue. It's getting dark out. It's about 9 o'clock that evening. And to kind of help you, I've mentioned some names for you. You're going to hear a lot of names throughout the course of this trial. But I want to give you a little visuals as to who some of these individuals are to help you remember them. Keith Johnson. Brandon Ward, good friend of Keith Johnson, and they went over to 797 Danby together. The first meeting place between Justin and Curtis had been at a different location, and Keith Johnson and Brandon Ward and Keith's girlfriend pulled up 797 Danby, the driveway's on the left-hand side, and they pulled up into that driveway. Justin Badgett, the middleman, the person who had set up this transaction, he drove in his green Civic, a Honda Civic, and pulled up in front of the house. And in that house, 797 is the home of Isaac Spradling, Keith's uncle. Mr. Spradling was in his house, actually getting ready for bed when he started hearing some of the noise that was occurring. And he would look out his window and see much, if not most, of what occurred that night. Curtis Gill, he was in his black Ford truck. He had followed Justin Badgett to the area. And Michelle Gill, she was with her father, the defendant, in the red Chevy truck. Mr. Knight had pulled up, one of the last people to arrive, in the red Chevy truck, and when he came by the area where Curtis and Justin had parked, which was right in front of 797, he let Michelle out. Michelle got out of the car, and then the defendant drove down the road, turned around, and got into a tactical position, a couple houses down, facing everybody, parked right by the fire hydrant that was pointed out to you. And that is a picture when police were called as to where specifically his red Chevy truck was located. To help you out then, here's an overhead view. This is Danby, the street that you were just on. When Justin Badgett pulled up, he parked here. Curtis Gill, in his black Ford truck, had followed him and parked.
Ladies and gentlemen, one of the first things I want to do is tell you that in our system, the legal system, the state of Ohio always gets to go first. And when it comes to final argument, they get to go first and last. It's not because I don't want another shot at you, so to speak, but those are the rules. And the defense agrees to abide by them. The other thing I want to bring up real quick is that some of you heard a little bit about the case. There's been some publicity about that. And to some of you, we talked about, you've got to put that publicity out of your minds. And with some of you, you even agree that not everything that you read in the newspaper is accurate. Now, for you history majors, you might remember this, okay? Anybody ever remember President Dewey? Okay? This is 1948, and Chicago Sun-Times said, we're going to get the scoop on everybody. We're going to tell them that Dewey be true. Well, he didn't. That's the problem with believing everything you read or believing everything you hear. One of the reasons that there's 12 of you is so that you can use your collective memories to remember what happened and to remember it accurately. You're going to get some photos, you're going to get some documentation that you'll be able to take back into your palatial jury room back here, and that you will then decide. You don't have any minimum amount of time, you don't have any maximum time. You take your time. You talk amongst yourselves. Now, let's talk about, let's make one mistake, but not make this mistake here. The defense theory has nothing to do with someone because they were on a stolen dirt bike. That's not the theory. The theory is that Mr. Knight, who sees his daughter, his only daughter, the daughter of his only grandson, in a dark street, and his son-in-law are trying to recoup, at least at the start in a peaceful manner, their stolen dirt bike. Now let's talk a little bit about Mr. Hunt. Mr. Knight is going to testify. He's going to testify probably last. That's going to be at the end of the week. We can't tell you exactly when people are going to testify. Some people take longer than others, some take shorter. It's kind of a guessing game. But you will hear from Mr. Knight. You will also hear from the son-in-law. You'll also hear from Michelle Gill. You'll also hear from a few other people. Now, it is 1 year and 2 weeks ago that March 20th, it's somewhere in the 7 to 8 o'clock area, and Curtis Gill gets wind of the fact that he believes his stolen dirt bike that he bought for his son about a year earlier might be on the internet. So he looks on the internet, he goes, yeah, that's mine. People will say, well, how do you know it's that? Mr. Gill put some custom work and parts onto that bike. So he tries himself to make contact. Doesn't get a response. He then finds out that this Justin Badgett is acting as a go-between, and I'll agree with Mr. Palmetto. He acts as a middleman. And at that point in time, Badgett sees the idea of making a couple of bucks. And so he's offered between $50 and $100 by Keith Johnson. Mr. Gill is told by Mr. Badgett, meet me over on the Leonardo, or something like that. It's a street that's nearby. When Mr. Gill, by himself, unarmed, goes over there, doesn't have a lot of money, but he just wants to retrieve his son's stolen bike that's been gone for a year. Mr. Badgett will tell you things are fine. They have a nice little conversation, and the bike is supposed to be there, but it's not. And then all of a sudden, Mr. Badgett gets a phone call from Mr. Johnson. It says, hey, can't get the bike over there, bring it over here to Danby. Bring it over to this house on Danby. As it turns out, it's his uncle's, Mr. Sprague. The bike is kept in the back. So Mr. Badgett, in his little Civic, leads Mr. Gill, the son-in-law, at Mr. Johnson's urging over to Danby. Now, while this meeting with Justin Badgett and Mr. Johnson is occurring, Mr. Gill is on the phone to the Akron Police Department 10 times. He's calling all over the police department. Hey, send a cruiser over here. Just want to kind of referee things to make sure everything goes okay. And at first he's told, yeah, we'll send a cruiser over. And then he finds out somewhere along the line that, no, we sent the cruiser someplace else. So Mr. Gill continues on with Mr. Badgett, and they go over and they pull up on Danby. Mr. Badgett's car is in front. Mr. Gill parks his black Ford F-250 in front of 797, the house that you just saw earlier this morning. Okay? Danby. That's important. He parks it right in front of the house. Right in front. Keep that in mind, because later on when a witness testifies, that's going to become a key point. Then he's on the phone and he's trying to reach his wife, who's in the pickup truck that belongs to William Knight. William Knight, grandfather, father of Michelle, father-in-law of Curtis Gill, had been at the Gill residence. He'd come over that night. He comes over often. It's his only daughter, it's his only grandson. And he's told, hey, we're trying to get this dirt bike. How about bringing your truck over to help carry the bike away, not as part of some posse that's going to cause havoc over a dam? Why bring Mr. Hunt? Why bring Mr. Knight's truck? Because Mr. Gill had tools in the back of his truck, and they wanted Mr. Knight's truck to haul away the bike. That was the plan. There was no plan, there was no conspiracy that, hey, bring your there's going to be trouble. As a matter of fact, you're going to hear testimony that the initial conversation with Badgett Gill over at Badgett's house, the initial conversation with Mr. Gill and Mr. Johnson was friendly. Until Mr. Gill, after seeing the bike go up and down the street a couple times, pulling out it's like a flashlight on your smartphone. It's dark, I remember. It's almost 9 o'clock at night. And he's using that flashlight to check the serial number because he has one thing that hasn't been mentioned yet. He has the title. He has the title to that bike. He's checking with his flashlight to make sure the serial numbers on the bike match the serial numbers in his title. Mr. Badgett is standing there and he goes, uh-oh. Mr. Gill says, that's my bike, here's my bike. That's when everything changed. That's when Mr. Johnson says, well, give me some money for this. And Mr. Gill says, why? It's my bike. You're trying to extort me for my own bike. And then Mr. Johnson starts the bike up, tries to get away.
Once the jury returns a guilty or not guilty verdict, the judge will determine the suspect's sentence. This case was no different.
Before I even look at the verdict forms, ladies and gentlemen, please remember that you are in a courtroom. I know this has been an emotional proceeding. There are to be no outbursts. If there are, you will be asked and escorted from the courtroom, asked to leave, and then escorted by the deputies from the courtroom. I will now read the verdict forms. On count 1, murder. We, the jury, being duly impaneled and sworn, do find the defendant William M. Knight guilty of the offense of murder. We, the jury, further find the defendant William M. Knight did have a firearm or dangerous ordinance on or about his person or under his control while committing the offense of murder, and displayed the firearm, brandished the firearm, indicated possession of the firearm, or used the firearm to facilitate the commission of the offense. And we do so render our verdict upon the concurrence of 12 members of our said jury, each of us said jurors concurring in said verdict, signs his or her name hereto this 10th day of April 2018, and the verdict form is signed. There are 12 signatures on the verdict form. The B verdict form to count 1 is blank. On count 2, we, the jury, being duly impaneled and sworn, do find the defendant William M. Knight guilty of the offense of murder. We, the jury, further find the defendant William M. Knight did have a firearm or dangerous ordinance on or about his person or under his control while committing the offense of murder, and displayed the firearm, brandished the firearm, indicated possession of the firearm, or used the firearm to facilitate the commission of the offense. The paragraph for the date is dated April the 10th of 2018, and there are 12 signatures. The B alternative to count 2, that verdict form is blank. On count 3, we, the jury, being duly impaneled and sworn, do find the defendant William M. Knight guilty of the offense of felonious assault. We, the jury, further find the defendant William M. Knight did have a firearm or dangerous ordinance on or about his person or under his control while committing the offense of felonious assault, and displayed the firearm, brandished the firearm, indicated possession of the firearm, or used the firearm to facilitate the commission of the offense. And we do so render our verdict upon the concurrence of 12 members of our said jury, each of us said jurors, concurring in said verdict, signs his or her name hereto this 10th day of April 2018, and there are 12 signatures on that verdict form. The alternative count 3 verdict form B is blank. On count 4, we, the jury, being duly impaneled and sworn, do find the defendant William M. Knight guilty of the offense of felonious assault. We, the jury, further find the defendant William M. Knight did have a firearm or dangerous ordinance on or about his person or under his control while committing the offense of felonious assault, and displayed the firearm, brandished the firearm, indicated possession of the firearm, or used the firearm to facilitate the commission of the offense. The paragraph for the date is dated April the 10th of 2018, and there are 12 signatures on that verdict form. The alternative verdict form B, related to the inferior offense, is blank. Counsel, would you like to review the verdict forms?
Yes.
Counsel, is there anything else for the record then before I discharge the jury?
All right.
He can request a poll if he would like a poll.
Judge, would the court please hold?
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I have been asked to poll you, so I will ask if the verdict forms have been, as they have been completed, if that is your individual judgment and your individual verdict. And I'll just proceed in numerical order. Juror number 1, as they have been completed, are the verdict forms your individual judgment, and did you sign those verdict forms as I have read them?
Yes.
Juror number 2?
Yes.
Juror number 3?
Yes.
Juror number 4?
Yes.
Juror number 5? Juror number 6?
Yes.
Juror number 7?
Yes.
Juror number 8?
Yes.
Juror number 9?
Yes.
Juror number 10?
Yes.
Juror number 11? And juror number 12?
Yes.
All right. I will accept the verdict of the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your time and attention and your patience the last week and a half or so. At this time, you are released from those instructions that you are not to discuss this matter with anyone or look into any of of the publicity or anything else that might be out there related to the case. You are free to discuss the case at this time with anyone going forward. You do not have to talk to anyone. I will ask that you remain in the jury room. I will make myself available to you in just a few minutes to talk about any matters that, sometimes people have questions that I can answer. I'd also we are not permitted to speak, obviously, through the proceedings, so I will make myself available for a few minutes following these proceedings. Counsel for one or both sides may have questions for you. You are free to speak with counsel if you would like to do so. You do not have to, but they can sometimes learn from your impressions on some of the evidence or what was presented here this last week or so. So at this time, I will excuse the jury with the thanks of the court.
The judge sentenced William Knight to prison. Big thanks to our viewers for joining the courtroom journey with us. Your interest in the stories of justice is what keeps our channel alive.